Recently, one of my readers asked me about Dreamer's Throne. They were wondering what was it that made me write this book. And so I thought it would be fun to share a little bit about my thought process behind this new series. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author. I've written 26 books, published most of them, and I make these videos because there are a lot of authors out there who are sort of fumbling around in the dark, and I don't want you to be one of them. Anytime that I sit down to write a new series, I do so in what I think is a very organic way. What I mean by that is that I typically have a single idea that sparks the story. It's worth noting that I have a million ideas. In fact, I have so many ideas that it would be impossible, even if all I did was write, to capture them all. So instead, I write the ones that I like the best down in a journal, and that journal then serves as inspiration for future stories. What I often find, though, is that the ideas that come back to me over and over and over again, the ones that sort of get stuck in my head, playing on repeat and just won't leave me alone, those are the ones that I end up turning into series. The idea for Dreamer's Throne was sort of like that. I had this vision of a world where a nobleman is sitting in this sort of rundown inn at a table, managing a criminal empire. You know, often in stories, we have characters that are like intelligence gatherers. And what's interesting is that typically they play second fiddle to whoever the hero is, right? The hero is the one who is going out and doing the cool things, but they need somebody who can gather information for them, can sort of provide them with insight into the underworld, stuff like that. Well, I thought, why not make that person, the person who gathers the information, the spider at the center of the web, why not make that individual my hero? And so that's the idea that I started with, that just picture in my head. And from there, I found that the idea wouldn't leave me alone. It kept coming back. I'd be just doing random things, and I'd think, oh, well, what if this happened or that happened? Once I get into that process of really starting to pick at the details of an idea, that's when I know that it's something I want to create. Now, with this book in particular, when I sat down to sort of figure it out, I decided on a couple of things. First, I decided that I wanted to stretch myself. I wanted to grow in my ability to write, and so I decided to try writing something that I had never written before. And so I started thinking about genres that I don't typically write. The first one to come to mind was horror. I don't read a lot of horror. I don't watch horror movies, and I'm not really into like blood and gore and that kind of stuff. In fact, I don't like being scared. I know for some people, they like that like adrenaline rush, but I'm not into it. So why did I decide to write a horror novel? If I'm honest, I think there are two major factors. The first is that I had read this book called Lord of the Mysteries, and I would highly recommend it. It is fantastic. It's less horror and more spooky. And I think that's where Dreamer's Throne ended up. I know I sometimes refer to it as horror or horror light, but the reality is that it's more like eldritch fantasy. It's more just spooky. But I really loved what the author of Lord of the Mysteries was able to do with the tone of the book. And I thought to myself, I'd really love to write a book with that sort of tone as well. That was an interesting challenge for me as an author. And then the second is that I had this experience that was honestly kind of terrifying. It was just really unsettling, and that experience somehow connected with this story that I was trying to piece together in my mind, and they became inseparable. And so, as I was envisioning what would become Dreamer's Throne, it just ended up getting entangled with this sort of unsettling experience that I had. And so it just ended up being, again, sort of eldritch fantasy. There are always a lot of decisions you have to make when you're setting out to write a series. One of the key decisions that I had to make was whether or not I was going to write an OP protagonist, an overpowered protagonist. And all of my other series have overpowered protagonists. So it would be fitting for me to just sort of continue in that vein. I know that's what my audience likes, and honestly, that's what I like as well. But I had also been reading a fantastic writing craft book, and in it, the author suggested that if you want to increase the tension in your book, it's a good idea to give your main character challenges that, while they can be overcome, never go away. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. What's something that I could do that is outside of my normal wheelhouse? And the first thing that came to mind was that both John from Battle Mage Farmer and Thorn from the Tower series and the Titan series are both physically powerful. And so as sort of a challenge to myself, I said, okay, I'm going to make a character who is overpowered, but is not physically powerful, which turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. The specifics of Garrett's disability didn't come because of any great planning on my part. Instead, I had been thinking a lot about the challenges of not being able to walk, because at the time, my wife and I had just been told that it was likely that our foster son may never walk. And so I'd been thinking a lot about sort of the challenges that we would face if that was the case, and the changes that we would need to make to our lifestyle in order to accommodate that challenge. And all of these ideas were sort of rolling around in my head, and so when I sat down to write Dreamer's Throne, it just sort of flowed naturally, because that's what I was thinking about. From there, I just started exploring the world. I just started trying to figure out what made sense and what fit thematically with this idea that there are monsters around every corner. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense about where my new series, Dreamer's Throne, comes from. The books are really fun, and if you haven't checked them out, you absolutely should. The first one is available on Amazon, and the second and third are actually up on Patreon if you want to read ahead. I'm hoping to get started on book 4 relatively soon, and we'll see where the series goes after that. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer each and every one of them.